Brian Story.
Hey, Sean.
First of all, I want to say thank you for agreeing to do this little Google Hangout on air for sustainable equity. I really appreciate your time.
Of course, lady. I absolutely, anytime I can be of service, I'm here.
True submissive.
You don't know.
Well, anyway, so I've been kind of life coaching you lately with respect to kind of getting started with your passionate mission. As long as I've known you, you've always been really passionate about following and analyzing politics. Mm-hmm. And, you've sort of come to me with like, oh, I want more out of life. I want to feel, I want to feel that same sort of passion I felt in my younger days. And so you're actually embarking on that journey now. And so I'd like you to sort of describe what your current project is and how you're going about it and whatnot.
Sure. Well, first of all, the project primarily is focused on sort of a criticism of the left from the left. I feel like my space most naturally comes from the left of center politics. However, I see the current manifestation, either media driven or what have you, of the left as being sort of counterintuitive, unproductive, regressive. There are many elements to it that I don't like, and I feel like in order for the left to become a sustainable movement that works toward the progression of humanity, that we have to think very hard about some key things in the way that we present ourselves as leftists in modern politics. To sort of make ourselves more productive. I think that, in particular, identity politics and the way that we focus on it needs a lot of work. But
I would concur with that. So how exactly? What's your platform? How are you going to get your message out?
So I'm starting a blog right now. The tentative name is Alt Left, but I'm still kind of mulling on that, where I'll be posting video and written content, probably mostly written content at first, just kind of discussing some of these big issues, my big criticisms at the sort of contemporary left narratives, still criticism of the right to a certain extent, although that is less important to me. Just sort of a social political commentary on a broad spectrum, like what's the big view, what's the long view, because I feel like that's something that's very much lost in most political discussion, especially in the media these days.
Would you care to go ahead and maybe kind of quickly list some of the specific issues that you want to be tackling and or describe that big view, like where exactly do you think the left should be heading?
Sure. I think first of all, the left is very fixated on the idea of supporting various marginal communities, but the sort of intellectual framework in which the left considers those identities almost works to sustain them in unproductive ways. They're so fixated on identity politics that they can't see. It's like they have these notions or these ideas about how marginal communities are or operate, and they want to pay lip service to them. But there isn't a whole lot of focus among the left, which is still predominantly white. There's not a lot of focus on what actual how we could actually solve problems for marginal communities and what that should look like. Instead, the debate just becomes about who's racist, who's sexist, and who's homophobic. And really all that serves to do is kind of shut down conversation, prevent our narrative from having any durability and alienating people in ways that are unnecessary, especially given the polarization in this country. So I think part of it is that sort of how we approach identity politics and how that how we can present that in a different way to be more productive and less acrimonious. I think that's one piece. Another Another sort of piece is, you know, in terms of long-term goals, you know, what is the world that we're fighting for? Like, what are these things that, you know, what is this future that we want to create? I think that we have a very traditionalist notion about what sort of policies, you know, like, you know, social safety programs and things like that. You know, we have a very sort of, our ideas of what social progress looks like are kind of locked in the middle of the 20th century. And I think that as progressives, we need to start expanding the notion of what it means to empower communities, empower people at the local level, what role the federal government could have in that process, what role it should have. And that's also, by the way, why I'm interested in and agree with a lot of the work that you're trying to do, you know, with sustainable equity. Let's see, other issues. I covered a few in detail there. Would you like me to describe a few more? I could probably go on all day.
Well, it sounds basically, and thanks for the shout out. Thanks for saying the name of my nonprofit.
Full disclosure.
Yeah, so it sounds basically like you're saying that the dialogues have become reduced. That a lot of basically the left has lost its long view vision, its greater vision. Perhaps, and I'll just add some of my own observations. Like, I think that there's been almost like kind of like a race to the middle over the past 20 years, and the left is, in a sense, almost lost, you know, its own core value or its own core vision of what can be, and what should be. So it kind of like sounds like you're trying to bring some more substance and some greater dimensionality to those dialogues. So I think that's wonderful.
Thanks. Yeah, I mean, I see it as extremely critical, especially especially considering you know, who's likely to become president in the fall. You know, I won't say any names, but when we think about how we want her to behave and what we want her to do, we have to be very clear about what that looks like and how we're going to get there. Otherwise, you're right, we're just going to end up with more of this corrosive centrism crap that doesn't help anybody.
Yeah, if you say Voldemort's name, Voldemort might appear. Well,
I won't go that far, but you know.
but this is, you know, the purpose of this dialogue is to say their names, and we are here to talk about the election and Trump versus Clinton.
Yes.
And so we wanted to sort of move into that. What I just kind of give me your general synopsis. Like, what do you have to say about the nature of this election?
Sure. Well, you know, to start off with, like, I haven't trusted the Clintons as political entities since I was, you know, in my very young years of political interest, you know, like 15 years ago. I've kind of had just a very, ranging between milquetoast and sort of dispassionate, you know, whatever. I don't really have any passion for them, you know, primarily because I don't see them as being true advocates for the kinds of issues that I care about. I don't judge Hillary Clinton for the things that her husband did in office, but they weren't great. So, you know, whether it's, you know, anything from welfare reform to policy toward gays in the military, blah, blah, blah. And I know you could situate everything that he did within historical context, but I'm not a fan, bottom line. Hillary Clinton, you know, what really turned me off of her was sort of the way that she conducted the 2008 campaign. I think that this campaign has been a lot better, but, you know, I still kind of feel like there were some things done during that campaign, the way that the campaign addressed Obama and his supporters, and, you know, just there were several critical statements, including by Bill Clinton, that were kind of race baiting and things like that, and that was kind of unfortunate. So I just kind of like lost respect for them then as well. So most of it is like sort of an image issue. Like I kind of don't really embrace the image of the Clintons, if that makes sense.
Right.
Yeah. And so there's that. Having said that, in general, with Trump and Clinton, if we're looking for a world that has a transformative politics, and we're looking for a future that more supports the ideas that you and I will elaborate on more in a bit, Trump is not what gets us there. For sure. He's a madman. And I don't even necessarily, I'm not even necessarily discounting the reasons why his supporters support him, but knowing who he is, I think he's a psychopath. Clinton, on the other hand, I see a possibility there, although, again, I'm not passionate about the prospect of her being president. I think Clinton is a political animal, in that if the left shifted their thought around what it means to be a citizen, and how being a citizen isn't just motivating people to vote and then checking a box on a ballot, that citizenship involves advocacy and pushing for the issues that you support, and putting pressure on Congress, putting pressure on the president. And I think that she would respond to that in similar ways as she had during the campaign, which I perceive to be at least somewhat authentic, if not totally. So I see some potentiality there, and find myself more, wanting to vote for her. Not with any illusion that her election will, get us exactly, any of the stuff that I want. But I think that moves us closer in the direction of a sort of politics that I would be more comfortable with. Trump is just chaotic. I don't think he would destroy the country. I think the country is a lot more durable than people give it credit for. But I think in the meantime, the only effect that he could possibly have is just to create more work to be done after he's finished. No doubt.
Right. Well, I'm not sure if I latch on to the notion of Trump being a psychopath. I think they're both sociopaths, clearly. And, but that's become such a common condition. I don't even know who we can find that is quote unquote electable. Who is it? So, it's interesting that we talk about, can one of these candidates get us closer to an ideal future, when the general mood in the air surrounding this election, I think, is, more to the effect of which candidate represents a possible future. Let's talk about this sort of double-sided mirror of the apocalypse that this election represents.
Sure. And to your credit, we kind of broke down some of this before before we started our talk today. But I absolutely agree with you that with the idea that the media drives this narrative that is supported by either side, that the other candidate is going to lead to the apocalypse, or will, in some way be deleterious for our country, beyond reproach or beyond repair. I definitely don't buy that at all. Like I said, I think, especially if you think about separation of powers, the judiciary, it's hard to imagine one president really being able to destroy the country. I just think that both candidates offered, in terms of what they would likely do, their temperament, etc., offer different visions in terms of how much more work needs to be done after they are in office. And as far as just having a possible future in general, neither candidate presents I believe the kind of existential threat to America that is trumped up in the media.
I would agree to that. I do see, we've talked about this before as well. There is this kind of just barely beneath the surface of a common thread in lots of elements of modern media, both quote news media and entertainment, in terms of when we talk about the escalating rate of natural disasters and destructive weather patterns. When you turn on any sort of news and everything is just like very harshly negative. All these police shootings, all these other forms of shootings, Orlando, etc.
Which, by the way, the shootings are a great example that, you know, they've been declining. Violence has been declining in this country,
right.
and we cover it as if it's happening more. And that's how people, that's how people feel. You know, to quote Newt Gingrich, that's how people feel.
Right. And that's, yeah, and there's, you know, and you can sort of look at sort of like, you know, the progressive and the regressive aspects of increased coverage and increased attention to the issue. I see, you know, like we know, you know, of course I majored in Black studies and whatnot, so we know that police shootings of poor Black people have, you know, up until really the past few years been sort of constant in terms of their statistics. So what is this nature? What is this zeitgeist whereby they become covered more, you know, and in more dramatic ways? And then of course you see all sorts of race baiting from the internal direction of all these, you know, like riots and sort of like chaos in the streets and whatnot. And I think that, you know, and even going back to the other point, even on the fiction side, you know, when you see hugely popular shows like The Walking Dead, for instance, you know, like there's this whole like sort of message of apocalypse now, all this sort of thing that's kind of being spoon fed to the masses. And from you know, I work in mental health. From a mental health perspective, what that does is it encourages an attitude of nihilism, not necessarily from the philosophical orientation of the term, but from the psychological behavioral health orientation of the term. And so you get more this sentiment of the era of, oh, well, just fuck it, you know, like let's just do whatever. It's ultimately kind of like it's designed to sort of become a self-fulfilling prophecy. And I think that this election and the high drama of this election with Trump and Clinton, you know, because I would contend that the right sees Clinton as every bit as much as apocalyptic of a candidate as the left sees Trump. You know, all these things kind of like fall into place to continue and to encourage and to sort of amplify this narrative, which is really like you said, it's not realistic in terms of, you know, one president can actually effect that. But the masses can effect that. And when you see sort of the lock in place, you know, I do think that there's some sort of manipulation of a self-destructive like ethos, you know, like let's everything's going to hell, so, you know, just do what you want to do and destroy yourself.
Well, you know, they're trying to capture that energy that people have, that thirst for change, and that alienation from the system. They're trying to capture that and distill it into something that that becomes profitable in the contemporary media and political, you know, juggernaut. Like they're trying to turn it into something that doesn't challenge the status quo, but rather feeds it and gets higher ratings, you know. But it's, of course, it's just as much bullshit as it was before.
Right. And I like that you said the term ratings, because I was sort of on social media addressing this issue with another person who's paying attention, who's in the younger millennial ranks. And I said, you know, if you look at the model of the reality show, if a reality show's ratings are tanking, what do? You introduce a more contentious character who will go in and stir the pot and create more drama. So that's, you know, enter Donald Trump. You know, I do think, you know, you look at, I believe it was it the 2014 study, maybe it was the 13 study, Martin and Gillen's, that basically said that America is not a democracy anymore. It's very clearly an oligarchy. When you see people becoming increasingly aware of their disenfranchisement and increasingly dejected with respect to the status quo and with respect to this whole electoral process, because, you know, we see whoever you vote for. And I think in the wake of Obama, that's going to be even more of a big deal, you know, because we think, oh, okay, we have a non-white person in the office, you know, change we can't believe in, what have you. But there's been very little, especially for the most disenfranchised, for the poorest among us and whatnot. There's been very little in terms of far-reaching sustainable change. So people are all the more dejected now. And so what do
we
you
could
do?
debate all of the various reasons why that's the case, but conversation for a separate time.
Yeah, sure. But regardless, if you think in terms of the elections as media events and as like large scale performance art events, which is of course as a performer, that's how I see them. You do. It becomes very clear that the masses are becoming less interested in electoral politics and more interested in other forms of change. And so if you heighten the drama of the election itself, which is what they've done here, that it's barely you increase that sort of basically that energetic parasitic element of it, where not only do we have elections in this country being the illusion of inclusion, which is what they've been for some time, but now we have this sort of this high stakes element to it, like this high offense element to it. They've become much more emotionally manipulative. This election is the most emotionally manipulative one in recent historical memory. Mm-hmm. And I think part of that is it's about, okay, well, we know that this awareness is growing. Of course, they use aggregate internet data, like search algorithms and informatics and whatnot. So of course they're very much aware of how dejected the public is, and so what do you do to divert all this attention toward the big show, the big thing that they're trying to do?
To clarify, when you say they or there, let's be clear to the audience who you're talking about.
Right. I mean, you can use whatever term you'd like for that. My preferred term is the ruling class, like the idea that, these quote unquote elections are these kind of top-down orchestrated things, the behind-the-scenes element of what's actually going on here. If we're not actually in a democracy, we are in an oligarchy. They would be the oligarchs.
Right. Yeah, I just wanted to make sure that was made abundantly clear. I knew what you were talking about. Yeah. I agree with all of that. I mean, I certainly think that there are fundamental elements of the election, like actual truths of the election that are being exploited to accomplish those ends. Like there is some truth to the controversy. You know what I'm saying? Like people can point to the various, sort of conspiracy theories bandied about Clinton to challenge her leadership qualities, trustworthiness, etc. Whether or not any of that stuff is true is a separate issue. And with Donald Trump, all they have to do is point to the ridiculous things that come out of his mouth. Although even there, it's like you can see examples of how he says something, and yes, it's ridiculous, but then the interpretation in the media is that much more ridiculous. Not to discount how ridiculous the things that he says are. Like, I think that's part of his concerted strategy. You know what I'm saying? But just like to give one example, the recent debacle about Donald Trump, just made an assassination threat against Clinton and her potential Supreme Court appointees when he said, maybe the
Second Amendment people can handle Clinton.
Right. Exactly. Like, I mean, obviously, he's saying, oh, well, later, he was just saying, well, I'm talking about the people rising up and blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, I'm not convinced that he was actually saying that. I think he was probably just telling a joke. I doubt that even in the depth of whatever sociopathy he's experiencing, that he would actually want to call for gun owners to assassinate Clinton. Like, that it doesn't seem clear at all that was his motivation behind this, and yet the media are questioning him on it as if that's what he meant, rather than saying like, well, what kind of activism do you see among these people that could push Clinton, and like, what do you see are the policy deficits for Clinton on these issues, or like, what's the connection you're making between this assumption that Clinton is going to get rid of the Second Amendment and what she's done or said. Like, and the conversation never gets to that, because all they can ever focus on is just the trumped up, hyper-inflammatory nature of the words coming out of his mouth. I mean, really, the election is all about him. Very little of it is even about Clinton right now. You know what I'm saying? It's all just about the cult of Trump and are you with him or against him? You know what I'm saying?
Right. Right, and that's, first of all, I do think that Trump was very deliberately meaning to insinuate an assassination. Now, if you're talking about whether or not Trump wants to see Clinton assassinated, I don't think that's the case at all. I think it's more to the effect of that divide and conquer kind of manipulative thing, because both candidates are actually speaking to identity politics. Trump just has this other subset of identity politics that isn't usually included within the left's rubric of identity politics.
Well, it's all based on who they think is most likely to get them to 50+1 on election day. Like let's not pretend it's anything grander than what it is. Trump on the one hand, seeing working class disaffected white voters and nihilist millennials as being sort of his base, and Hillary Clinton seeing marginalized groups as being her base, and say college educated people being her base. Everything they're doing is really just to get those people motivated on their side to vote for them. It's not some some grand elaborate scheme. It's pretty simple.
Right. Well, I mean, I think, but when the point I was aiming at is that I think Trump's base does view that as an empowering type of statement. You know what I mean? Like that is the sort of thing. Trump is basically an insult comedian, and everything about his platform and about his run has been to that effect. It has been high drama performance art. It has been about what taps into that feeling of the disempowered identity category that he's speaking to, and so this idea of go get your guns, we'll take care of this the old-fashioned way. That is an appealing thing to the demographic that he speaks to. I think you have identified a key difference in yours and my worldviews. When you talk about the aim is to get it to 50+1. I don't think Donald Trump is trying to get elected, honestly. I think that if you're looking at the nature of the oligarchs, it's clear from other things that you and I have talked about with the Democratic, the DNC sort of neutralization, the clandestine neutralization of Bernie Sanders. It's kind of clear that Hillary Clinton is the establishment's pick. The establishment does not divide itself into the left-right paradigm. The oligarchy doesn't divide itself in that way. So I really think, what it really boils down to is Hillary Clinton was always meant to be the next president, and that is what it is, and it is what it's going to be. And really what they had to do to make that believable, because these media performance events are less about, I think, actually securing votes and more about securing a believability narrative, like the illusion of inclusion. What sort of sequence of events has to take place to convince the public that this is who they chose? So just like, with the Obama thing, with McCain choosing Sarah Palin, everyone's all like, oh, McCain made a mistake, McCain made a mistake. I didn't see it as McCain made a mistake. I saw it as McCain performed a believable mistake. He was trying to tap into the identity politics of the situation by bringing on a woman of the thing, but really that was just meant to set things up to make Obama all the more inevitable. I think that's what's going on here with Trump as well. I think that Trump they had to come up with a villain so villainous that as such as to make Hillary Clinton, and I mean like Hillary Clinton, look like a heroine by comparison, which is a ridiculous concept in and of itself. But they have succeeded in terms of constructing this believability narrative whereby the public can ingest this concept that Hillary Clinton is the better option or the lesser of two evils.
Yeah. I mean, I think I don't necessarily disagree with all of that. I think that the notion that he's in the election just to throw it to Clinton is an interesting one. I'm not sure that I'm totally sold on it, but I definitely think that there are a lot of things I've noticed over the course of the campaign that would seem to confirm that for sure. I would question the extent to which, Trump is a very egocentric guy. He must have some big payoff in waiting for him to get him to want to do all of this, because it just strikes that that whole notion that he's just in it to throw it to Clinton is tough to swallow given his obvious personality traits, like egotism. But I definitely think that there's certainly a strategy in place, regardless of whether that's true, to do exactly what you said, which is to make Hillary Clinton seem like a heroine, when in fact she's played it safe most of her political life. You know what I'm saying? Like, there are a couple of key instances in which she actually put herself out there, but for the most part, she doesn't. For working class people or otherwise. It's funny that.
Well, she does put herself out there for giving drones to Israel.
Yeah, gosh, unfortunately it seems like that policy is just here to stay, doesn't it? Like, can you envision a future? Can you envision any kind of future in the next decade or two where we're going to be able to get rid of the drones, stop the ridiculous amount of collateral damage? I don't know. It's almost like a real issue that is completely removed from the election that we're being subjected to yet again. Something falling by the wayside because of the Trump show, and what Trump is doing. What role he is playing in the election, regardless of whether or not you believe he's just a pawn for the Clinton machine. So yeah, I would say I may not agree with the sort of first notion of your logic, but I agree with sort of a lot of the conclusions that you come to vis-a-vis where the election is and the false narrative of Clinton as heroine.
Wasn't there a scandal a few weeks ago about Trump sort of like looting the pot of his own campaign? Like a redistribution of funds from the campaign toward his private businesses.
Yeah, I want to say there was something like this might be a way for him to just kind of raise some money, and then when the campaign's over, he can just find ways to funnel. He's already talking a lot about how he wants the RNC. He's wanted the RNC to kind of run the show. It's not even necessarily. He's not going to do GOTV. Get out the vote. So like, it's not even clear that he's going to be spending a lot of the money that he's raising himself. So it's very possible that he could just decide to find a way to cash that out after the election to support his various economic ventures. So maybe that's what is in it for him. I don't know. It's hard for me to believe, like, I'm not saying that Trump is like in the top 50% of people who are probably mentally capable of being president even, but like, it's hard for me to believe, and I will say this, it's hard for me to believe that that he thinks what he's doing or saying actually will get him elected. Now that you've kind of dug deeper into that, I do kind of find a bit of doubt there in my own views. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
It's hard to it's hard to believe. Like, even a dumbass wouldn't intentionally make do these things as like actual mistakes, or unintentionally make these kinds of mistakes. You know what I'm saying? Like, not even half of the, and God bless them, this sort of Southern poor white trash that I grew up around and come from in some ways, those people, and I use the word trash very affectionately, and for myself, just to clarify, but obviously, but yeah, when you hear a lot of those people sort of talk about it, you hear the same thing reflected back. Like, it's like they themselves they're flabbergasted to a certain extent. Like, they don't know how to explain it. I mean, you can get to like a core of true Trump believers that are like, that totally endorse everything that comes out of his mouth, and that's like the 30% of people that like probably still supported Bush in 2007. You know what I mean? The people who are just like reflexively right-wing authoritarians. I don't think that's like, even most of that half of the country per se, but yeah, I mean, it's just preposterous in some ways to imagine anybody doing the things that he's doing if the real goal was to get elected.
Yeah, and it's kind of like what I aim to speak to is that we've got some political energy now, building some energy of dissent as we've discussed before, and from my perspective, I'm sort of like a locally focused activist and more sympathetic to philosophical anarchy, And the libertarian perspective in terms of the current available options and of the political spectrum. These are sort of my foci. So I see the energy of dissent better spent in terms of actually like rolling up our sleeves and building a new social and economic order from the ground up, promoting workplace democracy, promoting worker ownership, these sorts of things. I see the two-party system as needing to really sort of be destabilized and torn down. And, the energy
people can disagree with that. Like very few people, if any, actually disagree with that statement. That's the thing. Like nobody wants these people anymore. And yet here they are,
Right. And so that's what I'm saying. Like, what's the rational motive for this? Like, the rational motive for me comes from the perspective of the ruling class and the oligarchs, and saying, if we can get people tuned into the ridiculous things that Donald Trump keeps saying, that's how we sort of like parasitically take that energy of dissent and redirect it toward our end. So that's basically kind of like how I see it. It is from that. It is the same model of TV, the same reason why you see the Kardashians on television nonstop. Have you seen that? Have you seen the Kanye West video, Famous?
No, I haven't. I'm not in touch.
It's very interesting. It's
not hip, as the children would say.
It's Kanye West, Kim Kardashian, Taylor Swift, Amber Rose, Rihanna, George W. Bush, Donald Trump, Caitlyn Jenner. I think I named everyone. Ray J. And I think there may have been one other person that I forgot, but I think I named most of them. And they're all like naked in bed together.
They're all naked in bed together?
Yes, they're all naked in bed, sleeping together. There's actually the song actually stops, and there's this big interlude from yay point to yay point of just them being naked together, and you hear them making like sleep noises. Did I say Taylor Swift? She's in there too. So it almost, visually kind of like, there is that statement of, we're all in bed together. Do you know what I'm saying? Like we're all sort of just creating this zeitgeist and creating this sort of manipulative show to keep you guys from working together. Divide and conquer like figures very strongly into this as well. As
it always has in the American political narrative. Let's be honest.
Right.
Divide and conquer goes all the way back to the very beginning, even before we were a country. Like that's the predominant strategy used by those in power to disenfranchise those who are getting the shaft. So it shouldn't be it's no surprise to those of us who follow history, sort of passionately, and it's something that we that's the dialogue that needs to be had. That's one of the core issues that we need to discuss, not all this crap that the media talks about. Right.
So it's interesting, criticizing the left from the left. How do you, as such a person, as someone who is a leftist, or maybe you would even describe yourself at this point as post left?
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
Go ahead. Sorry.
How do you configure your work in such a way as to destabilize these political identities, such as to create a greater unity amongst the oppressed classes?
Yeah. So first of all, I mean, my efforts kind of are, my efforts are kind of devoted to the sort of more macro effort, as opposed to yours, which is more specific, more micro. What I generally would see my role as being is sort of trying to keep leftist dialogue honest and holding people accountable to the types of true progressive positions as I see it. And they include things like local empowerment and local sustainability, alternative energy. I mean, there are so many issues that you and I align on, and I really believe like that's the lens through which I want to criticize people who call themselves, leftists. Whether in the media or otherwise. Like if you're a politician and you're claiming the mantle of, the marginalized groups within identity politics, then you need to be saying, you need to be talking about these things. You need to be talking about how we're going to how we're realistically going to bring jobs to poor Black communities, for instance. Like, if you're not going to tell me a specific strategy for how you're going to accomplish that, then frankly you're just paying lip service. It's that's just one small example of the sort of role that I see myself playing. Like, let's get real. Let's stop again using that mid 20th century narrative about social policy as our anchor for what needs to be done in the future, because it doesn't work. And let's start talking about concrete things that we can do to empower people, and not just sort of overgeneralized ideas that could theoretically empower groups of identities. You know what I'm saying? Like, they never want to get specific beyond saying the typical New Deal, Sturm and Drang.
Right. And so being a post-leftist, having been socially and culturally ingrained in the leftist movement, and sort of like the ranks of the Democrats and whatnot, you've got sort of like the conceptual fodder, the lingo, the methodology, shall we say, to forward that message to a leftist audience.
Yeah, I think that like the way, and even beyond some of the ways in which like some on the alt left or the post left now are presenting some of these narratives, like I think I can bring even more clarity of these issues to those people. I believe they're being sort of traditional leftists and Democrats. I believe they're being misled. And someone needs to tell them, and someone needs to tell them in a way that they're going to understand. And so I think that that's a project that a lot of people are working on. I'd like to be a part of that project. Right. You know what I mean? And that's not to say, like, just to clarify, I don't identify as a Democrat. I don't really identify with ideology per se. What I'm more concerned with is sort of that issue to issue focus, and then once you're focusing on those issues, like, what are the commonalities between them? And for me, one of those big commonalities is sort of local sustainability, and in terms of like to address the libertarian point, because I do see some commonality there as well, with my views or my motivations. To what extent do we hold the federal government accountable? Like, a federal government that's really effective would be getting smaller over time. The fact that it never does speaks to the hollowness of the issues that of the people that we put in charge of it. Like, if the federal government were actually solving problems for people in America, then they wouldn't need to continue working on them. Like, it's just like just right. Just something basic like that. You know what I'm saying? Like, if you're going to have a labor department that's focused on getting people jobs, well, I mean, the labor department's been around for more than half a century. How come there are all of these people in the same damn places that don't have jobs, that didn't have jobs 60 years ago? What's the point? What is the point? And if you're going to judge the efficacy of an organization like that, you really do need to go deeply or go deeper and look at that impact. I'm not saying that labor policy hasn't had a positive influence on America in some ways, although I would argue, after the last 30 years or so, it's kind of been a wash. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
Yeah.
Well, that's a good transition into the last point that we predetermined that we wanted to cover, which is sort of the debate of do you submit to this lesser evilism and vote for Hillary Clinton if she's your lesser evil, or Donald Trump if he's your lesser evil, or what's the thesis for going third party? Of course, you know my thing. I have to vote my conscience, so I'm still sort of like weighing between Gary Thomas and Jill Stein, because I am committed to a political philosophical thesis of decentralization. More power closer to the hands of the people, which means more power in state government, more power in local governments, and redistributing power downward as much as possible. But of course, from the libertarians, from the Green Party side, I do care about the environment. I do care about some issues that are traditionally relegated to the left in terms of addressing poverty and addressing disenfranchised peoples. I'm not particularly offended by immigration. Like that's not like a big one of my big core issues, honestly. Yeah. But I do believe in a free flow of migration. I think if anyone should just be able to migrate wherever they wanted to migrate. But if with this sort of like these points of mutual agreement. So I of course am going to vote in consistently with my conscience. And some people would say that I'm being irresponsible because, you know, it's kind of like a you know, stop Trump at all costs type of moment. Like that's the most ethical and the most selfless thing that one can do. But from my perspective, I really think that we need to be looking ahead and thinking beyond this sort of like present moment, acknowledging, of course, that this present moment is one that has been strongly manipulated by this consistent lesser evilism dialectic. You know, like the left, of course, has been driven much to the center and to the right even by this lesser evilism, this cyclical notion. So my whole thesis is, you know, we need to evolve beyond this two-party bullshit. And so when I vote third party, I'm voting against the oligarchy. I'm voting against this idea that we should continue to be manipulated in this way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, sure. Yeah, I mean, I respect that opinion. I personally disagree. I think that in terms of like, if we're thinking about what are our next steps in terms of moving in a direction where you know, we can start looking at some of these goals of devolving power, et cetera, rejecting the two major party candidates in this election per se doesn't necessarily get us there. And I think more to the point, like it's easier to imagine you know, several other ways in which we can move that dialogue productively without effectively. I do think there's some saliency to the sort of stop Trump at all cost movement, even though I recognize the superficiality of the media dialogue. I think the more the less harm that is caused to people who will most suffer. And there will be more people that suffer under Trump. I can guarantee you that, even if it doesn't destroy the country, just because he demonstrably doesn't care about large swaths of the country. Like, I think that we end up with a better starting point if we elect Clinton than if we vote third party or vote for Trump. You know, in terms of the moral consistency, like me voting for Clinton to me is a morally consistent opinion, or a morally consistent thing to do. Not because I believe necessarily anything that she's saying, or that I believe that she's you know, again, that sort of you know, that sort of narrative of the heroine. I don't need to believe any of that. I see her as nothing more than just a maintaining of what's been happening for the you know, the last 8 years. And that the work that we need to do, as you said, kind of exists outside of that system. But like the work that we do will be diluted by the kind of you know, even if short term and even if somewhat ineffectual sort of chaos that someone like Trump brings. And I think that every vote that's not for Clinton is a vote legitimize, if not causing that to happen, legitimizing that as a co-equal responsible possibility, when I just don't think that's the case. And then I have basic philosophical disagreements with the libertarians, like and with Jill Stein. I mean, first and foremost, like, you know, our generation, you know, in our generation, we can see a lot of potential. We can see a lot of millennial, you know, especially older millennials. Although, you know, I'll probably sound like a curmudgeon when I say that, like an old, you know, get off my lawn, you know. So I don't mean that, but the millennials, I think, have a lot of potential in their philosophy and the way that they think about the world and identity politics that can push a lot of these things that we're talking about forward. And when I look at someone like Jill Stein, who is a political failure by any metric, and has also latched on to all sorts of silly leftist notions about politics over the years. I just find it hard to believe that she's that voting for her is like serves any actual purpose. Like, she's just kind of there as a protest. Like, it really, like, she has no like, I can agree with her on most of the issues and still see right through what she is, which is an ineffective politician. Like, it brings nothing to the table, in my opinion. You know, she can't even get elected dog catcher in liberal Massachusetts. Like, come on, she's pathetic. like. Gary Johnson, I have a lot more respect for, actually, than Jill Stein. I think that Gary Johnson has a track record of effectiveness for the sort of things that he supports, and I think that that puts him leagues above someone like Jill Stein. And I think it's also why, not just because of the presence of Trump in the election, how he's alienating some of those moderate right-wingers or whatever, but that's why Gary Johnson has like triple the support of Stein in the polls, because it's obvious on its face on some level, I think, that that he's just a more capable, far more capable politician than she is. And makes more sense. And now, having said that, where I believe the libertarians get it wrong, and why I'd never vote libertarian as a philosophical point, is because I don't believe the libertarians, like, insofar as their end is the same, like the idea of devolving power, like that's still sort of a goal. How they get there is profoundly unclear. And frankly, it kind of just feels as if they want to pull the rug out from under everything and then see what happens, which to me seems kind of infantile, kind of juvenile, a juvenile way to look at what needs to be done. Like I think ultimately the goal should still be the same, but like we have to think about what steps are going to get us to that goal, and I don't see the libertarians getting us there, if that makes sense. Mainly because the libertarians don't really pay any even lip service to sort of social issues of any kind, like the ways in which power exists in this country. They seem to ignore large portions of what that power looks like. And I think if you're going to be an anti-authoritarian movement that looks to devolve state power, but you don't recognize some of the groups that have that power, then you're essentially advocating for a system in which those people maintain power. Like if you don't address the pre-existing power structures that disenfranchise people before you pull the rug out from under, you're going to end up with like a Russia situation, where the same people that were powerful and had money in many cases under the USSR, still have power today. You know what I'm saying? Like they didn't really have a true transition. All they really did was create a different name for it. You know what I'm saying? And so that's what I fear, the libertarians represent, a sort of action without authentic design or like a design that's connected to the fundamental purpose, which, as I said, I agree with.
Right. Well, very, very wonderful exposition that you just gave, Brian. You really elucidate something that I do hold to be true, and would cop to, even as someone who is going to vote third party, that even the third party, even the third parties don't really give us an option that is satisfactory. And that's something that is very something's very poignant. I also appreciate your sort of breakdown of Stein versus Johnson in terms of who would be more effective. That actually is something that actually I think may actually tip my scale a little bit and affect my decision as I sort of go back and do some fact checking to look into the thesis that you just presented as far as Johnson versus Stein. So yeah, I think there is no sort of, I don't know, that's my greater point is voting is not the answer, and it certainly is not the exclusive answer. I've told you many times that I aim to vote with my sweat. I aim to vote with my work and what I mean to actually create in the world. Sustainable equity, the sort of platform, quote unquote, of sustainable equity is my vote. That's what I'm aiming to forward, and wanting to forward it through a different type of way. We've covered all the points that we aim to cover. I do want to sort of maybe, as far as bringing it home, I just want to ask you point blank, why do feminists love Hillary Clinton so fucking much?
Because it's easy.
Dang.
Because I mean, it's kind of the sort of anti-feminist feminism we see these days, isn't it? And not to acknowledge, I'll start off by saying this, like, I don't think there's anything wrong objectively with the idea of being proud that a woman could become president. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. And I don't know that a lot of feminist Hillary supporters who would even ascribe to the idea that they're voting for her just because she's a woman, or even partially because she's a woman. That remains kind of amorphous for me. But I do think you know, I do think there is some of that energy. I think that, you know, at least in some of the retorts that you hear from the left, and maybe not just from feminists even, but, you know, the retort that you get to, or sort of the response you get to this election sometimes is that easy answer that, like, she's going to make history, or that does become sort of a part of the narrative. And I think that, obviously, if we're looking at an election and saying that gender is that important, then that doesn't really serve the fundamental causes of feminism on its face. So, you know, for sure. So
I do offer one correction.
yes.
She's not going to make history, girl. She's going to make herstory.
Right, exactly. You know, whatever. love Trump's hate. You know, like what? And then there's that other element where, like, you know, the sort of obvious political strategy they pursue to kind of make Hillary Clinton seem more telegenic. Some people would say more human, but I just think she's not a telegenic person. That's fine. Whatever. I don't care. I don't care. But like the way in which they're trying to make her seem more telegenic is by having her use these words that are like commonly associated with like nurturing mothers. Like love and togetherness and, you know, nurturing and caring, and we need to care for each other, blah, blah, blah. And like, I don't necessarily disagree with that language out of that context, but like, you know, it's kind of obvious that it's just like a strategy for them, like the thing that they're making, you know, having her say the words or having her use to make her seem more relatable when otherwise she doesn't, in the kind of big speech setting, you know what I'm saying?
She definitely doesn't strike me as the archetype of maternal warmth.
No, she doesn't. And again, no slight against her, whatever. Like, you know, some people are really good at that sort of stuff, like Obama. It doesn't imply like a greater level of substance or anything like that, you know. I think it's another way in which the media narrative is distracted from real issues, for sure. But you know, it is the strategy. It's what they're doing, and I think it's disingenuous. Like, she probably could gain more traction just from like being her authentic self and being upfront and frank about the fact that she's just not good at coming off as nurturing, and maybe we just need a good tough leader or something. You know, now that the Democrats have embraced the sort of national security mantra, it wouldn't be that big of a stretch if you ask me.
So, you don't want her to shave her hair and look like Susan Powter. Well,
you got me.
And in all seriousness, though, coming from the perspective of sort of like a minority identity category that is at times manipulated, I think there is a point that we need to talk about the dangers of identity politics predisposing us to co-sign an agenda that is actually, you know, destructive, possibly genocidal, war hawkish, that kind of thing. I think Hillary Clinton definitely represents that as much, if not more so, than what the support for Barack Obama represented in 2008 and 2012.
I don't, but but I think that I agree with that first point about identity politics, that that we need to be very careful about, you know, like the notion, for instance, that, oh, well, you know, if you're gay and you don't vote Democrat, what the hell is wrong with you? Like, even if as a gay person it makes more sense for you to vote for a Democrat, like that kind of statement just I find very uncomfortable, or I'm very uncomfortable with that, because like I think it gives the identity a kind of power that runs counter to what we're trying to accomplish, which is that people should not suffer from the results of the identity politics that they're associated with. I think that it's counterproductive. And I'm not going to judge a gay person for voting for Trump because they're gay. You know what I'm saying? Like, you know, or a gay person for voting Republican, you know, whatever. Like, if that's what you want, that's what you want to do, and you're honest about it and you want to talk about it, whatever. Like, but yeah, they do manipulate us. They make us feel as if the only option is to vote Democrat if we are on the margins. And I think that disempowers us to a point where we're not, you know, fighting for those issues that I think you're fighting for, that I support. I think, again, it has us lose our key. It takes our eyes off the prize, for sure.
Very well said. Well, that sounds like an excellent place to conclude. What do you think?
Cool. Yeah, this has been a lot of fun. I hope we get to do it again soon.
Oh, yeah. Well, shoot, I wanted to do it months ago.
Look, you can come for me, but I didn't send for you. Now that we've done it, and I am of the feminine perspective. Now that we've done it, and I feel more comfortable in the space, I'll probably be more apt to agree to doing it in the future.
Cool. Well, as the world evolves, so too shall the conversation. Thank you so much, Brian. I'm greatly looking forward to your project, whether it's called Alt Left or by any other name. A rose by any other name would smell just as sweet, right?
So. I'm flattered. Yes, and I look forward to continuing the conversation with you. I think you're one of the few clear thinkers, that I can personally associate with, even though I can think of, people out there in the blogosphere and stuff like that might agree with us. So I'm very much interested in continuing this conversation however we can and working together.
Well, from clear thinkers to foggy bottoms. Well, I look forward to smelling your rosebud.
And I look forward to presenting.
Ciao, Diva.
Ciao.